The night sky over lower Manhattan was fragmented by countless neon lights. Outside the window, scattered lights were reflected on the Hudson River. But inside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the atmosphere was so oppressive that even breathing could be clearly heard. I sat at the end of the mahogany conference table, watching the woman opposite me slowly closing her documents. Victoria Rothschild, my legal wife, and the CEO of this multi-billion-dollar asset management company. From 7 p.m. to 10 p.m. A full 3 hours. No intermission. No water. Only her cold, razor-sharp scrutinizing gaze and those words that precisely pierced my self-esteem. Cole, I didn't hire you to be a mascot, much less to embarrass me like a mute at board meetings. Victoria's voice wasn't loud, but it carried the condescending air of someone accustomed to a position of power. Each syllable was like an icicle striking ice. Look at your performance report for the past quarter. 0 growth. And even continued losses. What happened to all those ambitious plans you had when you proposed to me? Did they all go to the stray dogs of Manhattan? I looked up and met her deep, cold, azure eyes, like an abyss. My hands, resting on my knees, tightened slightly, my knuckles turning white. For 3 years of marriage, this so-called son-in-law of a wealthy family, had never played the role of a husband in this home or this company, but rather an appendage that she could trample on and discipline at will. Victoria, the reason the project's data looks bad is because the initial public relations budget was cut by 2/3 without reason by Vice President Blake. If you'd like to see the second memo I submitted. I tried to defend myself, my voice low but tinged with resentment. Enough. Victoria slammed her gold pen on the table with a sharp, jarring sound. Cole, are you still trying to shirk responsibility? Blake is a senior partner in the company. His decisions represent the most professional market judgment. And you, all you do is make excuses. If it weren't for my father's sake, do you think you'd still be standing here talking to me? The contempt in her eyes was undisguised. I'm used to this kind of condescending judgment. But my patience today isn't out of cowardice, but because I'm waiting for an outcome. Just half an hour ago, my phone vibrated on silent. It was an encrypted message from my private investigator, containing several high-resolution photos. The photos were taken at a private club on Manhattan's Upper East Side, showing my wife Victoria intimately linked arm-in-arm with the so-called senior partner, Blake Kennedy. The two were behaving intimately, and in one photo, Blake's hand was even casually around Victoria's slender waist. Ironically, the reason Victoria told me she was working overtime tonight was to attend an emergency closed-door board meeting. Looking at this icy woman before me, a wave of utterly absurd mockery washed over me. She stood there, righteously berating and belittling me with accusations of business ethics and competence, as if she herself were an immaculate goddess in this business empire. But in reality, she had betrayed her marriage contract and was having an affair with a hypocrite who was constantly sabotaging me behind my back, trying to drive me out of the company completely. What? Did I hit a nerve and you can't even speak anymore? Victoria's disdain deepened when she saw my silence. Cole, I'm giving you one last chance. If you can't come up with a convincing plan at the investor conference tomorrow afternoon, you can hand in your resignation and vacate our villa in the suburbs. I don't need a useless piece of trash with no commercial value and no dignity clinging to my life. These words were more than just a workplace admonition. They were a blatant ultimatum. She intended to completely kick me out of my career and even strip me of my nominal home. I took a deep breath, forcefully suppressing the surging anger in my chest. I slowly stood up, my previously hunched back now completely straight. My height advantage allowed me to look down at her, and the calmness in my eyes made Victoria pause slightly, her brows furrowing involuntarily. I didn't look at the so-called performance reports on the table. Instead, I strode over to her desk. My leather shoes made almost no sound on the carpet, but the approaching pressure made Victoria feel inexplicably irritated. Cole, what do you want? Step back. She raised her head warily, her tone revealing a hint of bravado beneath. I didn't back down. Instead, I leaned down slightly, placing my hands on the mahogany table to close the distance between us. I could smell her expensive Chanel perfume, but behind that fragrance, I only felt an overwhelming coldness and hypocrisy. I looked at her exquisite yet cold face, a faint, chilling smile curving my lips. The image of the enormous sum of money that had been deposited into my private account just hours before flashed through my mind, an olive branch extended to me by a mysterious financial tycoon in Zurich. The golden opportunity one had been waiting for. My moment of retaliation had begun its countdown. I lowered my voice and spoke slowly and deliberately in her ear, in a tone only the two of us could hear. Victoria, you lectured me for 3 hours today, but I promise you, one day, I will marry you in style. Upon hearing this, Victoria was taken aback at first, then seemed to hear the funniest joke in the world. She sneered, about to mock my wishful thinking, when she suddenly met my eyes. In that instant, she saw something in my eyes that sent chills down her spine, not the despair of a loser, but the cold composure and determination of a top hunter when he sees his prey step into his trap. Are you crazy? Victoria instinctively leaned back, her heart skipping a beat. I straightened up, Regaining my composure, without uttering another word, I turned and opened the office door, walking out without looking back. Behind me, Victoria, sitting at her desk, stared at the empty doorway, her expression a mixture of emotions. She gripped the performance report on the table tightly, her nails digging deep into the paper. Little did she know, from that very second, I had unleashed the full force of the Manhattan financial storm. In a private club on Manhattan's Upper East Side, crystal chandeliers cast a dazzling and luxurious glow, while the air is filled with the aroma of fine cigars and expensive champagne. This is the arena of fame and fortune for New York's financial elite, where every clinking of glasses is accompanied by the flow of tens of millions of dollars. As I pushed open the ornate doors and stepped inside, Victoria, dressed in a custom-made haute couture gown, stood in the center of the hall. She was arm-in-arm with a tall, handsome man, Blake Kennedy. Blake, a senior partner in the company, was chatting and laughing, basking in the envious and flattering glances around him. As for me, the nominal legal husband of the Rothschild family, I was invisibly marginalized as soon as I entered the club. Oh, look who's here! Isn't this our famous, perpetually benched stay-at-home husband, an investment advisor? Blake caught my eye out of the corner of his eye, deliberately raising his voice as he strolled over, wine glass in hand. His tone was undisguisedly mocking and provocative. Cole, tonight's dinner party of this caliber isn't one you can just freeload at. Your invitation. You didn't just pick it up on the way here, did you? Several company executives and rich kids who usually depended on Blake for their livelihood immediately burst into laughter. Victoria stood beside Blake, her brows furrowing slightly, a flash of impatient disgust in her eyes. She offered no help, instead taking a small step forward, deliberately maintaining a closer distance from Blake, as if declaring to everyone that in this circle, Blake was her soulmate, and I was nothing more than a worthless burden. Black, don't expect too much from Cole. Victoria picked up her wine glass, her red lips parted slightly, her voice cold and grating. The fact that he's even here on time is already saving the Rothschild family a lot of embarrassing trouble. After all, some people's vision and abilities will never allow them to step out of the bottom of Manhattan their entire lives. These words were like poison needles, piercing me precisely. If I had been a husband 3 years ago, having just married into the family, I might have blushed and been at a loss for what to do in the face of such public humiliation and the combined trampling of my wife and rival. But at this moment, I simply stood there quietly, not even lifting an eyelid, looking at Victoria's beautiful yet arrogant face. I felt a pang of sorrow, but even more so, a cold, ruthless satisfaction at the impending reaping of the harvest. She thought she had everything under control, unaware that her greatest patron, Blake, was the very person who had pushed me into the abyss and ultimately led them to their doom. Victoria is right. I smiled slightly, my tone calm and without a ripple. I do have a narrow perspective and can't see how some people would package up the company's core secrets and their own dignity and hand them over to their competitors for a few project contracts. Upon hearing this, Blake's expression changed slightly, a barely perceptible hint of guilt and ruthlessness flashing in his eyes. He suddenly took a step forward, lowering his voice to warn me. Cole, you can eat whatever you want, but you can't say whatever you want. In Manhattan, losing your job is a small matter. If you mess with the wrong person, you won't even know how you disappeared. Really? I met his gaze, meeting his threatening eyes without flinching. Why is Vice President Blake so nervous? I didn't name names, but guilty people often feel like the whole world is against them, don't they? You! Blake was furious, nearly crushing the wine glass in his hand. Just then, Mr. Charles, the host of the club and the head of a long-established Manhattan tycoon, walked in, surrounded by several bodyguards. Upon seeing him, Victoria immediately put on an elegant and charming smile, leaving me and Blake behind, and went to greet him. Mr. Charles, it's a pleasure to meet you here tonight. Regarding our company's joint investment proposal for next quarter. Victoria gracefully extended her hand, attempting to shake hands with Charles and, in doing so, introduced Blake to the financial tycoon. However, Mr. Charles, who was usually quite polite to her, merely glanced at her outstretched hand without even shaking it, instead fixing his gaze directly on me, who was standing at the edge of the crowd. All eyes immediately turned to her, and Victoria's smile froze. Mr. Charles adjusted his gold-rimmed glasses and, surprisingly, walked through the crowd to stand directly in front of me. His face was filled with an unusually gentle and respectful expression, and he even bowed slightly, extending his right hand to me. Mr. Cole, it's a pleasure to meet you. Zurich just faxed over the latest capital allocation plan, and I, the old man, am utterly impressed by your grand vision. It's a great honor to meet you here tonight. The entire private club fell silent instantly. Everyone stared in astonishment at the scene, especially Victoria and Blake, whose expressions were as if they had witnessed an alien invasion. I extended my hand and shook hands with Charles gently, my tone calm and unhurried. Mr. Charles, you're too kind. This is just the first step. The next phase of the Manhattan financial empire will depend on your strong support. Yes, Yes, I will follow Mr. Cole's orders. Charles nodded repeatedly, his attitude as respectful as a subordinate meeting his boss. I turned my head and looked at Victoria, who was standing beside me, dumbfounded and pale as a sheet. I didn't say a word, but just glanced at her and Blake's bodies pressed tightly together out of the corner of my eye, then looked away and, amidst the shocked, bewildered, and suspicious gazes of the entire room, strode steadily toward the VIP area of the club. Victoria stood there, her lips trembling slightly, as she watched my departing figure. A sudden explosion went through her mind. When exactly had her useless husband, whom she had always thought she had firmly in her grasp, donned a terrifying cloak of power that was completely beyond her reach? This is merely the prelude to my revenge and counterattack. As I emerged from the private club, the Manhattan night air carried a damp chill. I settled into the back seat of a Lincoln Navigator that was already parked by the roadside. The moment the door closed, it completely shut out the prying, suspicious, and speculative gazes from outside. Jack, my personal assistant sitting in the passenger seat, turned around and handed me a document that had just been encrypted and faxed from Zurich. His tone was tinged with admiration. Mr. Cole, everything has been completed according to your plan. The multi-billion-dollar special fund in Europe has been fully injected into our offshore shell company registered in Delaware. As long as you give the order, we can launch an attack on the asset management company where Victoria is the CEO at any time. I took the document and quickly scanned the core data in the dim light of the car. Every number between the lines represented the hard-earned fruits of my 3 years of secret planning and patient lying low. In the past, Victoria always condescendingly berated me for being useless, complaining that I couldn't produce any outstanding results, and even openly flirting with that hypocrite Blake behind my back, treating me as a figurehead to be trampled on at will. She would never understand that the forbearance at the bottom of the pyramid is never cowardice, but rather preparation for a fatal blow when the storm arrives. What's been happening with Blake lately? I closed the file and asked calmly. Jack chuckled coldly, turned around, and started the car as he replied, "What else could happen? After losing face at the club tonight, Blake is getting restless. He's teaming up with several key directors in the company, preparing to launch an attack at the emergency board meeting tomorrow morning. They plan to use the loss-making projects you're in charge of to their advantage, jointly removing you from your remaining advisory position, and incidentally currying favor with Victoria. Being eager to jump into the fire pit is not a bad choice." I leaned back in my leather seat, a playful smile curving my lips. At 9 a.m. the next morning, the atmosphere in the penthouse conference room of that midtown Manhattan skyscraper was oppressively tense. The long mahogany conference table was surrounded by the company's core executives and directors. Victoria sat at the head of the table, expressionless as she flipped through the documents in her hands. She wore a sharply tailored white suit, which made her appear even more aloof and arrogant. Sitting to her right, Blake wore a smug, confident expression, his gaze towards the door filled with undisguised provocation. The moment I pushed open the conference room door and stepped inside, the people who had been talking in hushed tones fell silent instantly. All eyes turned to me, some with schadenfreude, others with indifference, but none with a shred of respect. I pulled out my usual corner seat and sat down calmly. "Cole, you're 2 minutes late." Victoria didn't even look up at me, her tone full of impatience. In this efficient financial center, someone who has no sense of time doesn't deserve to continue using the company's resources. "Sorry, I had to deal with some urgent matters in Zurich on the way, which caused the delay," I replied casually. "Zurich?" Blake scoffed, interrupting me abruptly. He stood up, placed his hands on the table, glanced around at the assembled directors, and deliberately raised his voice. "Victoria, directors, I see no need to listen to his excuses. Over the past 3 quarters, the investment arm Cole was in charge of has not only yielded zero returns but has also incurred millions of dollars in bad debts. This has severely hampered the company's overall cash flow and exposed his utter incompetence in business decision-making. For the long-term interests of the company, I propose that Cole be immediately removed from all his positions and that all his stock dividend rights be revoked." Blake's speech was highly inflammatory, and as soon as he finished speaking, several directors who had already been bribed by him immediately nodded in agreement. I agree with Blake's opinion. The company is not a charity and cannot support idle people. Mr. Cole is indeed not suitable to remain in the core management team. Facing the barrage of criticism, Victoria slightly raised her eyelids, her deep blue eyes utterly devoid of emotion. She looked at me as if I were a prisoner about to be sentenced to death. She didn't utter a single word in defense of me, her legal husband, and had even tacitly approved of Blake's suggestion. This utterly cold attitude was a direct reflection of their long-standing, undisguised contempt for me. "Cole, do you have anything else to say?" Victoria finally spoke, her voice as cold as ice. "If you sign your resignation now, at least you can retain some dignity. Otherwise, the board will sue you for harming the company's interests." The air in the meeting room seemed to freeze. Everyone was waiting to see me panic and beg for mercy in a pathetic state. However, I simply leaned back in my chair, my long, slender fingers lightly tapping the table. Each muffled thud seemed to strike a chord in everyone's heart. Looking at Victoria's smug face, I suddenly chuckled softly. Victoria, do you really think Blake is acting in the company's best interests? I said slowly, my gaze sweeping across Blake's instantly stiff face like a blade. Why don't we all take a look at this newly declassified company audit report? Let's see how our senior partner, Mr. Blake, has used his position over the past year to transfer the company's core assets to his offshore shell companies at a low price. These words caused an uproar. Blake's face turned deathly pale. He slammed his fist on the table and roared furiously. Cole, you're spouting nonsense. Don't listen to his lies. He's spreading malicious rumors. Whether it's a rumor or not, the data will tell. I winked at Jack behind me. Jack immediately connected his tablet to the projector in the conference room. The large screen lit up instantly, displaying clear details of fund flows, share transfer agreements bearing Blake's personal seal, and even audio recordings of his secret plots with competitors, all laid bare before the board. Each piece of evidence was irrefutable, shattering Blake's facade completely. The directors in the conference room changed their expressions drastically, their gazes towards Blake instantly shifting from approval to fear and anger. Victoria jumped to her feet, staring incredulously at the data on the large screen, then turned to Blake, her lips trembling, her voice shrill. Blake, what's going on? Are these documents real? Large beads of sweat appeared on Blake's forehead. He opened his mouth, but couldn't utter a single word in his defense. His carefully cultivated image of an elite figure, built up over many years, completely crumbled at that moment. I looked at Blake, whose face was ashen, then turned to meet Victoria's shocked, bewildered, and slightly panicked gaze. I stood up, looking down at the woman who had once lectured me for 3 hours, and said, word by word, Victoria, this is just the beginning. Your supposedly impregnable castle is actually rotten to the core, and you are nothing more than a pathetic wretch being manipulated like a puppet by your most trusted lover. Victoria staggered back a step, barely managing to steady herself by grabbing the table. Looking into my eyes, she saw a coldness and sharpness she'd never seen before, and for the first time, a profound fear welled up inside her. She finally realized that the man she had always trampled underfoot had transformed into a hunter in control of everything, and that she and Blake were walking step by step into an abyss of no return. The air in the boardroom seemed to freeze, pressing down so hard it was hard to breathe. The shocking financial statements and evidence of shady dealings on the big screen were like resounding slaps to Blake's face, shattering Victoria's carefully maintained pride and composure. Blake, his face ashen, slumped into his leather swivel chair, his legs giving way. Cold sweat streamed down his face. He opened his mouth, trying to explain, but faced with the overwhelming evidence, any words seemed utterly inadequate. The directors who usually fawned over him now avoided his gaze like the plague, some even muttering curses that his stupidity had dragged the entire team down. Victoria stared intently at the large screen, her deep blue eyes filled with shock, anger, and a barely concealed panic. She never imagined that her legal husband, whom she had always looked down upon and even publicly reprimanded for 3 hours, could have so quietly obtained all of Blake's incriminating evidence. What sent chills down her spine was the fact that the channels through which those confidential documents had been displayed were definitely not something an ordinary corporate consultant could have accomplished. Blake Kennedy. Victoria's voice was as cold as ice crystals in the dead of winter, each word carrying suppressed rage. What else do you have to say? Isn't your annual salary and stock dividends enough to satisfy your greed? You dared to transfer core assets behind my back and the board's back. Victoria, let me explain. This is a misunderstanding. It's Cole. Cole is falsifying data to frame me. Blake seemed to have grasped at a last straw, suddenly jumping up from his chair, pointing hysterically at me, and roaring with a ferocious expression. Yes, he forged all these documents. How could a spineless gigolo like him get these core audit materials? He must have been bribed by a competitor to ruin our company. Hearing Blake trying to shift the blame even as he faced death, I couldn't help but sneer. I slowly stood up, straightened my suit and tie, and looked at him calmly and mockingly. Blake, at this point, do you think all the directors here are fools? I took 2 steps forward, my voice not loud, but carrying an invisible pressure. Do you think I need to bring Interpol and SEC investigators directly to the conference room before you'll admit to these transfer agreements bearing your personal seal and your offshore shell company accounts registered in the Cayman Islands? Upon hearing this, Blake completely collapsed, his once rosy complexion turning deathly pale, and his breathing becoming rapid. He knew all too well what the Securities and Exchange Commission and the transnational money laundering investigation meant. If this evidence fell into the hands of federal law enforcement agencies, he would not only be utterly disgraced in Manhattan's financial world, but also face more than a decade in prison. Enough! Victoria slammed her hand on the table, a sharp rebuke silencing the farce. Her chest heaved, clearly furious. She glanced around at the bewildered board members and decisively issued the order. Security! Take Blake Kennedy out of here and hand him over directly to the company's legal and compliance departments. Freeze all his assets and stock options. Call the police immediately. Upon hearing the order, Several security personnel waiting outside rushed in and unceremoniously lifted Blake, whose legs were already weak and whose face was ashen, and forcibly dragged him out of the conference room like a dead dog. Blake's desperate cries echoed in the corridor, but were instantly cut off by the heavy soundproof door. The huge conference room fell into a deathly silence once again. Those usually arrogant executives didn't dare utter a sound, heads bowed, staring at the documents before them, fearing they'd be next to be purged. Victoria sat alone in the main seat, her expression shifting between anger and uncertainty. She slowly turned her head, her gaze returning to me. Gone was the former haughty contempt and coldness in her eyes, replaced by a complex, scrutinizing, and even slightly apprehensive sense of unfamiliarity. She realized she had never truly seen through the man she had been married to for 3 years. He could endure sarcasm and ridicule without flinching, remain composed in the face of dire straits, and even turn against Blake in a trap, instantly overturning the power structure of the entire company. This unfathomable cunning and ruthless methods made him seem less like a commoner son-in-law dependent on a wealthy family and more like a master hunter in disguise. Cole. Victoria took a deep breath, forcibly suppressing the turmoil in her heart, trying to regain her dignity as CEO with a commanding tone. While you helped the company uncover the mole today, your actions of privately investigating senior executives and unauthorized access to core data have seriously violated the company's compliance procedures. You must explain to me clearly where those materials you have come from. Also, who exactly was the person you met at the private club yesterday? Hearing her still adopting a condescending, judgmental stance, I couldn't help but let out an utterly contemptuous laugh. I ignored her questioning, turned around, put my hands in my pockets, and looked down at my usually arrogant wife. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows onto the conference room carpet, casting my shadow long and wide, right at Victoria's feet. Victoria, at this moment, you're not concerned about how much of the company's assets have been siphoned off, nor how long you can stay in this position. But are you in a hurry to interrogate me? I took a step closer, my tone chilling. Do you think that in this home, in this company, everyone is to be manipulated by you like a puppet, including my dignity, including my bottom line? Victoria, intimidated by my imposing manner, leaned back slightly, her brows furrowed, and she said sharply, Cole, watch your tone. I am your wife, and more importantly, the CEO of this company. What kind of tone are you using to talk to me, wife? Hearing those 2 words, the sarcasm on my face deepened. Victoria, when you were whispering sweet nothings to Blake in those private clubs on the Upper East Side, when you were ganging up on me in the office late at night, trying to kick me out, did you remember that you were a married woman? You keep calling me a piece of trash, but the one who was truly treated like a fool, being played like a puppet by her lover, was none other than yourself. You. What nonsense are you spouting? Victoria's face instantly turned extremely ugly, a hint of panic and embarrassment flashing in her azure eyes. Although she was close to Blake in private and tacitly approved of Blake's suppression of me, being exposed in public with such a shameful relationship still made her feel utterly humiliated. Whether I'm lying or not, you know better than anyone else. I looked at her coldly, my tone devoid of any warmth. Blake has been arrested. He transferred not only company assets from the offshore company, but also the special funds your family injected. Within 24 hours, FBI subpoenas will be raining down on the company's legal department. Victoria, how many more days can you hold on to your position as CEO? These words struck Victoria like a hammer blow. She jumped to her feet, her body trembling slightly from shock. You, what do you mean? This funding was a huge financial trap from beginning to end. And Blake was just a pawn in someone else's hands. I didn't give her a chance to ask any more questions. Instead, I turned around and slowly closed the document that belonged to me on the table. I walked to the door, stopped, and glanced sideways at Victoria, who was slumped weakly in her chair, her face pale, under the watchful eyes of everyone present. I uttered my final words. Victoria, this is just the first appetizer I'm giving you. I hope you can hold out as long as you did when you were scolding me tonight during the upcoming Manhattan financial crisis. After saying that, I opened the conference room door and walked out without looking back. Behind me came Victoria's outburst of anger, and the loud crash of tables and chairs falling to the ground. But to me it was nothing more than the final, impotent rage of a once high and mighty queen before she fell from her pedestal. As I stepped out of the building, the midday sun shone on the bustling streets of Manhattan, surrounded by hurried financial professionals and honking yellow taxis. I took out my phone and dialed an encrypted number in Zurich. The moment the call connected, a respectful yet aged voice came through. Mr. Cole, the first phase of the short-selling plan has been successfully completed. The Rothschild family stock plummeted immediately after the Nasdaq opened, wiping out a full $300 million in market value. Should we proceed with the next step of acquiring all of their prime real estate in Manhattan? I looked at the towering skyscrapers in the distance, a cold and confident smile curving my lips. No rush, I said calmly. Let the storm rage on. When they are completely cornered, I will personally come and close the net. I hung up the phone, put it back in my pocket, and strode confidently into the surging crowd. My empire had only just begun. 2 weeks have passed since that dramatic board meeting. In those 14 days, Manhattan's financial world has experienced a dramatic upheaval that will go down in history. Rothschild Asset Management's stock price plummeted on the Nasdaq, wiping out more than 2/3 of its market value. The once invincible financial empire is now mired in debt, with major banks and investment institutions knocking on its door demanding repayment. The once bustling top-floor offices are now deserted, resembling ruins. The mastermind behind all of this was me, the son-in-law they had abandoned and despised for 3 years. Right now, I'm sitting by the window in a high-end private tea room in Midtown Manhattan, a warm cup of Americano in my hand. My gaze is fixed on the once unattainable skyscraper across the street through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The huge electronic billboards on the building's exterior used to play Victoria's confident commercials. But now, those screens are either completely black or have been temporarily replaced. Mr. Cole, this is the latest financial insider information we've intercepted. Jack, the personal assistant, pushed open the door and gently placed a thick, confidential document on the table, his face beaming with barely concealed excitement. After being taken away by the FBI, that guy Black has completely confessed in an attempt to reduce his sentence. He not only admitted to embezzling all the company assets, but also handed over all the recordings and documents showing Victoria privately instructing him to misappropriate the family trust fund to cover up loopholes and overseas illicit funds. I flipped through the documents, my gaze quickly sweeping over the shocking financial loopholes and legal papers. To maintain her absolute control over the company and her illusory luxurious lifestyle, Victoria had not only violated securities laws but also crossed the line into federal felony. She thought she would always be that aloof, icy queen, unaware that in the face of the absolute strangulation of capital and the ruthless betrayal of her accomplices, her fragile defenses were as vulnerable as a piece of waste paper. What's Victoria's reaction now? I closed the file, picked up my coffee and took a sip, my tone as calm as if I were talking about something trivial that had nothing to do with me. She's completely panicked, Jack sneered, pulling up a chair to sit down. The Rothschild patriarch has been admitted to the intensive care unit due to a sudden heart attack. Seeing the situation turning against her, other extended family members not only failed to help Victoria share the burden, but instead joined forces to sue her, demanding the removal of all her family inheritance rights. Now, she not only faces bankruptcy, liquidation of her company, and civil lawsuits for huge debts, but may even face criminal charges from federal prosecutors for economic crimes. All her mansions, luxury cars, and personal accounts have been seized and frozen by the court in accordance with the law. Upon hearing this news, I felt no sympathy, only a cold, exhilarating sense of satisfaction that a long-planned scheme had finally come to fruition. 3 years ago, when I married into the Rothschild family, Victoria looked down at me with icy eyes, threw an extremely harsh prenuptial agreement in my face, and warned me that I would forever be nothing more than a dispensable appendage in this family. Every day after that, she made no attempt to hide her contempt for me, even secretly colluding with a hypocrite like Blake, brazenly trampling on my dignity. For 3 whole years, she pushed me to the brink of despair through emotional abuse, ridicule, and betrayal. However, she never dreamed that this extreme humiliation would force me to fully unleash my hidden top-tier business talent and win the full support of a European supercapital tycoon. I used her arrogance as a trap and her lover as a breakthrough point, step by step dismantling the business empire she had built with her own hands. Get the car ready. I stood up, straightened my suit jacket and tie, and a sharp glint flashed in my eyes. It's time to meet this once high and mighty Ms. Victoria. Half an hour later, the Lincoln Navigator came to a smooth stop in front of the Rothschild Asset Management building. The once heavily guarded lobby, always staffed with several tall and beautiful greeters, was now eerily silent and chaotic. A large number of creditors and reporters who had rushed to the scene were firmly kept outside by security guards, flashes of light going off constantly, and the noise deafening. As I stepped out of the car, several reporters who recognized me immediately surrounded me with their cameras and microphones, practically shoving them in my face. Mr. Cole, as Ms. Victoria's legal husband, what are your thoughts on the current bankruptcy crisis of the Rothschild Company? There are rumors that the mastermind behind this short-selling incident is a mysterious capital entity behind you. Is this true? Would you choose to take advantage of this situation and file for divorce now? Facing the barrage of flashing lights and a deluge of questions, I remained silent. I simply raised my hand slightly, and several professional bodyguards behind me immediately stepped forward, parting the crowd to clear a path for me to the private elevator. I walked in expressionlessly, letting the alloy doors slowly close behind me, completely shutting out the noise and chaos. The elevator goes straight to the CEO's office on the top floor. Pushing open the mahogany door that once forced me to bow my head as I entered, the sight before me made me raise an eyebrow slightly. The once luxurious and spacious office, furnished like an art gallery, was now a mess. Valuable calligraphy and paintings were carelessly discarded on the floor. Documents were scattered everywhere, and expensive tea sets were shattered into countless pieces. And Victoria, who was once arrogant and always wore custom-made high heels and scrutinized me with cold eyes, is now slumped on the carpet in front of the French windows, completely lacking in composure. Her signature white high-end suit was now wrinkled. Her once meticulously combed blonde hair was now disheveled and scattered over her shoulders, and her exquisite makeup was smudged with tears. She clutched a bankruptcy liquidation court summons tightly in her hand, her eyes red and swollen, her gaze empty and desperate. Hearing the door open, she froze slightly and mechanically turned her head to look at the doorway. When she saw me standing amidst the interplay of light and shadow, an extremely complex emotion appeared on her once beautiful but now icy face: shock, fear, disbelief, and a deep-seated regret. "Cole, it's you?" Victoria's voice was terribly hoarse, completely lacking its usual cool and arrogant quality. She tried to stand up, but her legs were weak, and she stumbled and fell heavily back onto the carpet, looking utterly disheveled. I didn't say anything, but walked towards her step by step with steady strides. My leather shoes made a crisp, piercing sound on the broken glass, each step like a heavy hammer, striking Victoria's completely broken nerves. I stopped a few steps away from her, looking down at this woman who had once been so high and mighty, lecturing me for 3 whole hours. Sunlight streamed through the dusty French windows, casting my shadow completely over her, making her appear like an insurmountable mountain. "Surprised, Victoria?" I spoke slowly, my voice calm and undisturbed, but every word carried a chilling coldness. "You must be wondering how this useless husband, whom you used to boss around and who didn't even dare to raise his voice, could suddenly become like this, so easily destroying everything you've painstakingly built." "Right." Victoria trembled violently. She raised her head, her bloodshot, deep blue eyes fixed on me, and her lips trembled as she said, It was all your scheme from beginning to end. Blake betrayed me. The company's accounts were exposed. The stock market was shorted. It was all your doing. Cole, you've been hiding so well. Who are you? Who's helping you behind the scenes? Who I am is unimportant. What matters is that you've finally fallen to this state." I looked at her coldly, without a trace of sympathy in my eyes. 3 years ago, I entered this home with sincerity, only to be met with your endless humiliation, ridicule, and ruthless betrayal. You lectured me for 3 hours, looking down on me for being worthless, and even brazenly slept with that scoundrel Blake, treating me like a complete joke. Victoria, when you were trampling on my dignity and enjoying the thrill of betrayal, did you ever imagine this day would come? Upon hearing these words, Victoria's face turned deathly pale. She opened her mouth, wanting to retort, wanting to use her CEO status to intimidate me as she used to, but faced with the undeniable facts and the stark contrast in reality, she found herself unable to utter a complete sentence. A wave of overwhelming regret engulfed her. She finally realized that she had personally destroyed the only man in the world who truly loved her and was willing to protect her, and that she herself had personally brought the devil into her home. "Cole, I know I was wrong." Victoria suddenly broke down, large tears streaming down her face. She crawled forward 2 steps on her knees, reaching out her hands to grab my trouser legs, her voice filled with desperate sobs and pleading. "Please, for the sake of our 3 years of marriage, help me. If you're willing to get the Zurich side to withdraw their short-selling funds, if you're willing to plead with the judge, I'll do anything you say. The company is yours. All the Rothschild family's assets are yours. Please, spare my life." Seeing the once proud and unapproachable Ice Queen kneeling at my feet, begging like a stray dog, I felt no emotion, only the exhilarating satisfaction of revenge. I slowly took a step back, avoiding her outstretched hand. I looked at her face, which was filled with despair and regret, and a cold, cruel smile curled at the corner of my lips. "Marital affection?" I sneered. "Victoria, when you were condescendingly humiliating me in the office, when you were whispering sweet nothings to Blake in the private club, did you ever think about what marital affection meant? No, belated affection is worthless." After saying that, I didn't look at her again, turned around, and walked firmly toward the office door. Behind me, I heard Victoria's utterly desperate sobs and the dull thud as she collapsed helplessly onto the carpet. But I didn't stop, for my glorious life had only just begun to unfold its most dazzling chapter. The early winter chill in Manhattan was biting, but it paled in comparison to the despairing stillness within the Rothschild family's core mansion. A full month had passed since the financial storm erupted, and the once powerful and arrogant Rothschild asset management, which had dominated Wall Street, was now completely in legal bankruptcy liquidation proceedings. The bronze signboard outside the building had been forcibly removed, and several glaring scratches remained on the ground, silently testifying to the dramatic collapse of a massive conglomerate. I sat in a private suite at a top-tier club in Midtown Manhattan, with light snowflakes drifting down outside the floor-to-ceiling windows. A steaming cup of black coffee sat on the table, and across from me sat several financial tycoons who had once wielded immense power on Wall Street. These same men had once scorned my marriage to Victoria, even joining Blake in ostracizing me at board meetings. Now, Each of them wore a fawning and awe-inspiring smile, watching me with trepidation, as if awaiting the final gavel of a judge. Mr. Cole, this is the latest asset restructuring plan jointly developed by several of our institutions. A senior Wall Street partner sitting on the left handed over a thick document with both hands, even bowing slightly. As per your wishes, the ownership transfer of the 7 commercial properties, 2 private banks, and all overseas trust funds originally owned by the Rothschild family in the heart of Manhattan has been completed. Now, these high-quality assets have all been transferred to your new company. I didn't even reach out to take the document. I simply picked up my coffee cup, took a small sip, and calmly glanced at the few once incredibly arrogant old men in front of me. You all acted faster than I expected. I slowly set down my coffee cup, my voice soft but carrying an undeniable air of control. However, this is only the first step. I've heard that some people have been making trouble behind the scenes regarding the land of the Rothschild family's old mansion. Upon hearing this, a conglomerate executive sitting opposite him broke out in a cold sweat and hurriedly waved his hands, explaining, Mr. Cole, you are astute. That land was originally Victoria's father's private property, but after the family declared bankruptcy, some collateral relatives attempted to transfer the assets privately. However, rest assured, we have already blocked all their escape routes legally. With just your order, that old house will be auctioned off by the court tomorrow, and it will absolutely not fall into the hands of any outsiders. I nodded slightly, my eyes remaining completely calm. That luxurious old mansion on Manhattan's Upper East Side was the place Victoria had used to humiliate me. 3 years ago, when I first walked into that house with my suitcase, Victoria was sitting on the living room sofa, sipping red wine, pointing condescendingly at the shoe cabinet in the entryway, and coldly telling me, Cole, this is the Rothschild residence. You are not allowed to step on the imported Italian carpets. Change into slippers immediately upon entering, and don't bring the dirt from the underfloor into the house. In the countless days that followed, Victoria relentlessly trampled on my dignity with her pervasive cold violence and aloofness. She believed she would always be the queen of this castle, and I would always be the subservient vassal, but she never dreamed that when the gears of fate turned, this family mansion she was so proud of would ultimately be seized by the court and publicly auctioned, falling completely into the hands of the man she once despised. Just then, there was a gentle knock on the door of the private room, and my personal assistant, Jack, strode in. He whispered in my ear with a strange expression, Mr. Cole, there's an uninvited guest outside who insists on seeing you. She says she's been waiting here for 3 hours and won't leave until she sees you. Who is it? I raised an eyebrow, my tone showing no surprise. It's Victoria, Jack said in a low voice. She's completely abandoned by everyone now. The other elders in the family think she's dragged the whole family down with her. So they not only expelled her from the family register, but also froze all her personal belongings. She's living in a rundown motel now, and she doesn't even have a decent custom-made dress left. Today she heard that you were meeting with Wall Street tycoons at this club, so she kept asking around and came looking for you. Upon hearing this name, the financial tycoons in the private room exchanged glances and tactfully stood up. Mr. Cole, since you have other personal matters to attend to, we won't disturb you any longer. We will keep in touch with your assistant regarding the subsequent asset transfer. Okay, no need to see me out, I replied casually. The tycoons retreated with a sigh of relief, closing the door to the private room behind them. Inside the spacious, luxurious room, I was left alone, sitting by the floor-to-ceiling window, quietly watching the snowflakes dance in the air outside. Let her in, I said calmly. Less than 2 minutes later, the door to the private room was pushed open again. A figure staggered in. If I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I would have found it hard to connect the haggard-looking woman in front of me, with her disheveled hair and wearing a faded and obviously ill-fitting cheap down jacket, with the aloof, icy Queen Victoria who once stood high above everyone else, wearing bespoke suits and acting arrogantly in the company. She had lost a lot of weight. Her once exquisite and aloof face now appeared somewhat sunken. Her eyes were bloodshot, and her lips were chapped. The arrogance and coldness that had once been ingrained in her bones had vanished, replaced by a despair and humility that ran deep in her bones. Victoria stood in the doorway, her legs feeling as if they weighed a ton. Unable to take another step, she looked at me, sitting on the leather sofa sipping coffee, and trembled violently. Tears welled up unexpectedly in her swollen eyes, streaming down her pale cheeks. Cole, she called my name hoarsely, her voice almost pleading and sobbing. She walked towards me step by step, and when she reached the coffee table, she could no longer support her legs. Her knees buckled, and she knelt upright on the expensive carpet. This time, no one forced her, and no camera captured her disheveled state. She knelt willingly at the feet of the man she had once trampled upon and driven away as a piece of trash. I didn't say anything. I just held my coffee cup and looked down at my ex-wife kneeling at my feet. Cole, I was wrong. I really know I was wrong. Victoria sobbed uncontrollably. Her hands trembled as she reached out to grab my trouser leg, but stopped abruptly a few centimeters away. as if even touching me was a luxury. For the past month or so, I've tasted the bitterness of being abandoned by everyone. My father refused to see me in the hospital. My family kicked me out of the house, and that bastard Blake pinned all the blame on me in prison. I have nothing left. Cole, I really have nothing left. She raised her tear-filled face. Her deep blue eyes filled with endless regret and despair. I finally understand the despair and pain you felt back then. I once thought I was an invincible queen, able to control other people's fate and dignity at will. But only today did I realize that I had personally destroyed the only person in this world who truly loved me and was willing to accept everything about me. Cole, please, for the sake of our 3 years of marriage, even if it's just to let me stay in that old house as a maid, please take me in. Listening to her tearful confession and pleas, I felt no sympathy, only a cold irony that transcended time. 3 years ago today, it was also a winter's day. I prepared a warm dinner for her in the cold kitchen, only to be met with her icy reply. I don't eat junk food. Throw it away. For those long 3 years, she used every bit of indifference and humiliation to trample my sincerity underfoot, even secretly conspiring with Blake to try and destroy me. If it weren't for the powerful support I secretly received from a European financial tycoon, activating top-tier business strategies, it would be me, Cole, kneeling on the ground, facing imprisonment and utter disgrace. Compassion should only be reserved for those who know how to be grateful. For a vicious ex-wife who betrayed the marriage, trampled on dignity, and brought a venomous snake into the home, any sympathy would be the greatest cruelty to the one who had suffered so much. I slowly put down my coffee cup, the bottom of which collided with the glass tabletop with a crisp, cold sound. I leaned down slightly, reached out, and gently pinched Victoria's thin chin with my long, slender fingers, forcing her to look up and face me. At that moment, a glimmer of hope flashed in her eyes, as if she saw me as the last straw she clung to when she was drowning. However, the temperature in my eyes was colder than the winter snow outside. Victoria, I whispered in her ear, speaking slowly and deliberately, in a voice only the two of us could hear. That night 3 years ago, you sat in your office, looking down at me and berating me for 3 whole hours. You thought I was useless, that I couldn't produce any outstanding results, and you were even eager to fire me. Do you remember what I said to you back then? Victoria froze, her pupils dilating suddenly as if she had remembered something extremely terrifying. I smiled slightly and cruelly uttered those words from years ago. I told you that one day I would marry you in style. But now it seems you don't deserve it at all. As soon as I finished speaking, I ruthlessly shoved her chin away, leaned back on the sofa, and said in a cold tone devoid of any human emotion, Jack, see the guest out. Also, inform the court that the Rothschild family's old mansion will be auctioned off first thing tomorrow morning. I don't want any more filth to appear in this place. No, Cole, you can't do this. Please, Victoria screamed desperately, collapsing onto the carpet, her face covered in tears and snot. 2 burly bodyguards stepped forward expressionlessly, one on each side, and lifted the utterly devastated Victoria, dragging her out of the VIP box like a piece of trash. The door to the box slowly closed, shutting out her heart-wrenching cries. I picked up my black coffee again and looked out the window at the swirling winter snow. The financial storm in Manhattan had subsided, and my business empire was just beginning to take shape. Springtime in Manhattan is always accompanied by a moist sea breeze from the Atlantic, dispelling the gloom that has accumulated throughout the winter. Sunlight spills onto the glass facades of the skyscrapers lining Fifth Avenue, refracting thousands of golden rays. Today is the inauguration ceremony of the headquarters of the newly established top financial group, Sterling Capital Group, and also the most anticipated day in the history of Wall Street's financial world. Standing before the floor-to-ceiling windows of the newly built 88th floor penthouse, I stood in a perfectly tailored bespoke suit, a glass of soda in hand, calmly gazing down at the bustling traffic below. 3 years ago, I was a wealthy son-in-law, constantly scorned and ridiculed by my wife. Today, I am the true power behind the scenes in the city. Those who once looked down on me now bow to my every whim. Mr. Cole, all the celebratory telegrams from Europe have been delivered. The UBS board of directors unanimously approved your proposal regarding the next phase of the global energy strategy. Personal assistant Jack strode into the office, placing a brand new schedule on the mahogany desk, his face filled with undisguised reverence and pride. Furthermore, regarding tonight's inauguration banquet, the heads of Manhattan's major families, the leaders of major financial groups, and all the core partners on Wall Street have confirmed their attendance. Not a single person will be absent. I turned around, placed the water glass on the table, and replied casually, Understood. Make the arrangements. The dinner will start on time tonight. Understood. Jack nodded, turned and left, closing the heavy alloy door behind him. At 8 p.m. that evening, the most luxurious ballroom in Manhattan was ablaze with lights and filled with celebrities. It was a gathering place for the true titans of American business and politics. Every figure entering the hall shone brightly under the media's barrage of cameras. The air was thick with the aromas of fine champagne and expensive perfumes, weaving a symphony of power and money. As I descended the spiral staircase alongside several heavyweight directors from European conglomerates, the clamor of the room abruptly ceased. Hundreds of eyes were fixed on me, eyes filled with awe, obsequiousness, envy, and almost fanatical worship. The usually arrogant tycoons, all beaming with ingratiating smiles, rushed forward, eager to raise their glasses in a toast, afraid of missing an opportunity to further collaborate with sterling capital. I raised my glass, gently clinked it against theirs, and delivered a brief opening speech with calm and elegant words. The entire audience erupted in thunderous applause that lasted for a long time. However, amidst the glitz and glamour, surrounded by cheers and jubilation, two figures stood out starkly from the opulent atmosphere in a dark corner of the banquet hall. That was Victoria and Blake. Since Rothschild Asset Management declared bankruptcy and Black was sentenced to a long prison term in federal court for economic crimes, Black managed to secure probation through expensive legal counsel, but at the cost of financial ruin and a tarnished reputation, with no financial institution willing to hire him again. Victoria, the once arrogant queen, was not only expelled from the family core, but all her properties and luxury goods were auctioned off by the court to pay off debts. She now barely survives by doing odd jobs and borrowing money from all sides. Tonight, they went to great lengths, even spending their last few $100s to bribe the security personnel on the perimeter, just to manage to sneak into this high society dinner. They had hoped that if they could see me, if they could weep and beg in person, perhaps I would remember some past favor and spare their lives. When Victoria saw me surrounded by countless dignitaries, basking in unparalleled glory in the center of the banquet hall, her face turned deathly pale, and her legs trembled uncontrollably. She wore a faded, out-of-season, cheap old coat, her hair disheveled, and her once refined and proud face was now etched with the weariness of time and hardship. Compared to my dazzling brilliance, she seemed like a vermin from a sewer, utterly insignificant. Cole, it must be Cole's doing. All of this should have been ours. Blake's eyes were bloodshot, his face contorted with rage as he gritted his teeth, consumed by jealousy and resentment. He had completely forgotten how he had betrayed us and how he had ended up in this state, instead blaming all his hatred on my counterattack. Just as Blake lost control and was about to recklessly rush into the center of the crowd, several burly, sharp-eyed security personnel instantly noticed something amiss. They silently surrounded them, grabbed Blake and Victoria like chickens, and unceremoniously dragged them towards the banquet hall's doors. "Let me go, you snobs! I'm a member of the Rothschild family. I want to see Cole. Cole, come out here. I'm your wife." Victoria completely broke down, screaming and crying without regard for her image, tears mixed with her desperate makeup sliding to the ground. The loud commotion instantly drew the attention of all the guests. Everyone turned their heads, watching the scene with the cold indifference of watching a clown. I paused slightly, holding my wine glass, and turned around to calmly look at my ex-wife and rival, who were being held down on the ground by security personnel and looked utterly disheveled. The entire room fell into a deathly silence. All the guests held their breath, awaiting the verdict of this newly minted business tycoon. I didn't speak, but walked steadily towards them, step by step. My leather shoes clicked crisply and rhythmically on the marble floor. I looked down at Victoria, who was slumped on the ground, my eyes devoid of anger, pity, or even the slightest ripple of emotion, as if I were looking at two complete strangers. "Cole, please, for the sake of the past 3 years, save me." Victoria saw me approaching and frantically crawled forward as if grasping at a last straw, but security personnel held her knees down firmly. Tears streamed down her face, her voice hoarse and desperate. "I know I was wrong. I shouldn't have betrayed you. Shouldn't have humiliated you like that. Please give me a chance. I'll do anything." Blake, standing to the side, gritted his teeth and hissed venomously. "Cole, don't get cocky, you gigolo. One day you'll..." Smack! Before Blake could finish speaking, his personal assistant Jack stepped forward and slapped Blake hard across the face, making his mouth bleed and his vision blur. "Watch your mouth in front of Mr. Cole," Jack warned coldly. I didn't even lift my eyelids, but slowly squatted down to meet the terrified and desperate Victoria's gaze, looking at her face, once proud and unapproachable, now as wretched as a stray dog. A faint, cold mockery curled at the corner of my lips. "Victoria," I whispered in her ear, speaking slowly and deliberately, in a voice only the two of us could hear. "That night 3 years ago, you looked down on me and berated me for 3 whole hours, belittling me and saying that even my breathing was wrong. Did you ever imagine that you would be kneeling at my feet, begging for mercy? Today?" Victoria shuddered violently. Her pupils contracted sharply, and the last glimmer of hope in her eyes shattered completely. She opened her mouth, wanting to explain, but couldn't utter a single word. Overwhelming regret, shame, and despair washed over her like a tidal wave. Her vision went black, and she fainted. Drag these 2 eyesores out and never let them set foot in any of Manhattan's upscale business districts again. I stood up, disdainfully patted my suit sleeves, and coldly ordered, "Yes, Mr. Cole." Several security personnel dragged the unconscious Victoria and the ashen-faced Blake out of the magnificent banquet hall with clean, efficient movements, as if they were dragging a dead dog. As the doors closed again, the oppressive atmosphere in the banquet hall instantly dissipated. Several quick-witted tycoon businessmen immediately raised their glasses, their faces once again plastered with obsequious smiles, and came over to toast me. Haha, those were just two clueless clowns, not worth mentioning. Come, let's toast to Mr. Cole's grand ambitions. Cheers! Hundreds of crystal glasses clinked together under the dazzling crystal chandelier, producing a crisp and melodious sound. I tilted my head back slightly, and downed the wine in my glass in one gulp. Outside the window, the Manhattan night sky was dotted with stars, and the Hudson River flowed ceaselessly. My era was just beginning its most glorious dawn. And thank you for listening. Please subscribe, like, share, and comment. Thank you.